Look at this screen. We're used to modern puzzle games delivering massive cascades of blocks, collapsing violently downward the second we touch the glass. Over time, frictionless touchscreen interfaces and pay-to-win mechanics have optimized away the friction, and with it, the skill ceiling. The algorithm does the heavy lifting, while you provide the reflexes. If you want a grid that actually fights back, one that requires deep strategy and analytical thinking over mindless tapping, you have to look backward. A perfectly smooth user interface makes a game easy to play, but it also risks hollowing out the mechanics. Which brings us to a 2003 Game Boy Advance port of an early browser-based puzzle game called Zooo. Its North America release was canceled at the last minute, leaving European and Japanese cartridges as highly sought-after imports. Why would any purist track down a physical cartridge to play a fast-paced grid game on a clunky 4-way D-pad, when a flawless touchscreen version, Zookeeper, exists for the Nintendo DS? Because the Game Boy Advance version's objectively inferior controls accidentally created a true mechanical masterpiece in the puzzle genre. Tapping a screen with a DS stylus is practically instantaneous. You spot a match, you touch it, the tile's clear. The GBA requires step-by-step physical movement. This split-screen chart illustrates what we call navigation latency. While stylus actions per minute peak instantly, the D-pad input follows a staggered, heavily delayed curve. To move a cursor from one corner of an 8x8 grid to the opposite end, you have to press the D-pad a minimum of 14 times. Even with input buffering, that requires up to 1 full second of continuous pressing. In a game where the time bar is constantly depleting, that delay is lethal. If you play reactively and fly by the seat of your pants, your timer will plunge into the red before your cursor ever reaches its destination. On the DS, the lack of navigation latency makes the normal mode a breeze. A skilled player can swipe fast enough to play indefinitely without ever facing a game over screen. The D-pad acts as a strict mechanical governor. It physically prevents you from outscaling the challenge through raw speed. To survive the timer, you have to use pattern pre-recognition. You must plan your next 3 moves while your current tiles are still falling into place. That forced downtime strips away the casual tapping and turns the board into a highly analytical, chess-like experience. Beyond simple survival, pattern recognition is the primary tool for exploiting the game's unique scoring algorithm. This flowchart breaks down the recursive logic cycle driving the board. The engine scans the grid, finds a match, clears those tiles, applies gravity to the tiles above, and then scans again. If you manually initiate a base match, the algorithm rewards you with a tiny fraction of the points needed to advance the level. When gravity creates a chain reaction, when falling blocks form new matches on their own, the math shifts to a geometric progression. The system applies an exponential multiplier, doubling, quadrupling, and octupling your base score. Knowing this alters how you manage the grid. Setting up a high-value collapse at the top of the screen is strictly superior to making an obvious low-value match at the bottom. Mastering Zooo means learning to engineer board-wide algorithmic collapses, rather than simply reacting to the nearest animal face. Executing that math quickly requires perfect visual clarity, which was a massive hurdle on the original unlit Game Boy Advance screen. This color contrast matrix shows how the developers solved that hardware limitation. They used highly saturated, vibrant palettes, sharp yellow giraffes, purple hippos, and orange lions, to stand out clearly against an unlit background. That distinct separation between hues is an absolute requirement to support the high-speed visual scanning the timer demands. The game's cute, expressive aesthetic serves a strict mechanical purpose. It was a functional workaround for early 2000s hardware constraints. The design isn't entirely flawless. The cracks show up most clearly in quest mode. Here, the game's curator issues specific, counterintuitive objectives. For example, capture 7 times without triggering a chain reaction. Because the gravity mechanic introduces high-variance luck, tiles falling to fill empty spaces can automatically trigger an unavoidable chain. You can play perfectly and still fail the stage. While it breaks up the monotony of standard play, this heavy reliance on random number generation violates the strict skill-based logic that makes the core loop so satisfying. We've broken the franchise into a decision matrix. If you play for speed, stick with the DS for flawless touch controls but low difficulty. For a modern twist, the 3DS version introduces RPG elements and offense and defense stats. Just be prepared for frustrating RNG when drawing defense-heavy hippo or elephant tiles instead of attacks. But if you're a purist willing to earn scores through pattern pre-planning, the Game Boy Advance port is your target. It is the only entry in the franchise with a skill ceiling high enough to pose a genuine game-over threat to an optimizing player. The paradox of Zooo is that its greatest strength came from its hardware's biggest weakness. That mechanical depth validates the rising secondary market prices for the physical European PAL cartridge, remaining a worthy investment for collectors and mechanical optimizers alike. In game design, a perfectly frictionless experience often leads to a shallow one. Sometimes the physical limitations of older hardware provide the exact boundaries needed to make a game truly unforgettable.